to come to keep them out.
Oops, so it looks like we're going live.
Okay.
I guess intro time.
So maybe we're not doing the intro today. It's different every day, but
okay.
So we were talking backstage, and it looks like we're live now. So we've got a great show planned today. International law expert Christopher Black, friend of the show, is back with us. We're going to talk Africa. He was just explaining the status of the Rwandan general that he got acquitted in the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal.
In a world where the quality of information available to poorer communities is doctored, tainted and sometimes regressive, where the words fake news have come to mean other people's opinions, it is vital to rely on news platforms with journalists who have feet on the ground and can report the truth. New York Parrot, a New York-based national and global news outlet, is changing the narratives of media operations. We focus on the news that matters, like self-empowerment, entrepreneurship, finances, health, security, politics, and more. We strive to curb violence, racial and economic discrimination, and to promote peace and socio-economic development of multiculturally diverse world. As we give voice to the people, we also give your business a voice and make it heard. Get your products and services off the ground by advertising on our fast-growing platform. With so much of daily visits to New York Parrot, you can't afford to be invisible to prospective clients on the website they trust the most. Our posts reach millions of people across the New York State and around the world. Advertising on our new site will unlock an audience of thousands of potential customers on your doorstep. New York Parrot is born to prosperously speak tomorrow for the voiceless.
All right.
I guess welcome back to a second start of the show, Foreign Policy Review. And we were in the middle of kind of a sentence with our special guest, Christopher Black, friend of the show. Welcome back. Who has an intimate relation, not just with international law and the case in Yugoslavia, but with Africa, is what we were sort of touching on. I wonder if we can get back to that topic before we get to, Africa and the rest of it today.
Yeah, I was saying that I was involved in the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal for most of the last 20 years, actually. And the man I defended, who was the former Minister of Defense and the head of the National Police, General Ndindilimana, who was charged with multiple counts of genocide and crimes against humanity, was acquitted after many years because the charges were all fabricated. Has tried to get entry to Canada to visit, just as a tourist, to visit some friends and family here, but was denied entry by a new form the Canadians have invented to pre-screen people they don't want. So this is how the world works. And I'm sure that the Americans and the Rwandan government has something to do with that.
So he left Rwanda, he moved to Belgium, and that's where he currently resides, but he would like to go to Canada, and He can't even get a tourist visa to Canada.
Well, as a Belgian national, he's already got an automatic visa. But the Canadian government invented this new form called electronic travel authorization form. You fill it out on the line. You can get it back in minutes or days or never, and he's being denied really by their response. So it's a method they use. Even though you've got a visa to come, they can still keep you out by pre-screening you, basically, if they don't like you.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done to him. He was important because he fled Rwanda in 1994 during the last year of the war. People put out threats against his life, so he went to Congo. Then from there, he was allowed into Belgium by Willy Kleist, who was then the head of NATO, or became the head of NATO. He was then the foreign minister of Belgium, and then Willy Kleist became head of NATO later. But he allowed him into Belgium, and he stayed at a military post there for several months, and then was asked to come back to Rwanda when Kagame took over to become president, but didn't trust Kagame or the Americans and Canadians who asked him. so decided to stay in Belgium. The Canadian government asked him to come to Canada in 1995, but he decided to stay in Belgium. So he was welcome then, but he's obviously not welcome now because he's laid charges against General Dallaire for his crimes during the war in Rwanda, what people call the genocide. So I say Rwanda is an important thing to talk about in the whole African picture because that is one of the first places where you see an American presence after the Cold War, there in Somalia. And of course, their pressure on Libya, but we can talk about all those things.
You know, I didn't pay as much attention to the news back then, but I remember the Rwandan genocide being everywhere in the Hungarian sort of Europhile media, just all over the place. I thought, okay, that's how I thought about the region at the time, you know, just another African genocide. I'm ashamed.
Yeah. Well, I was too. When it happened, I was in Toronto doing some trials, and I just read the general press, and all I got was the impression of two savage tribes murdering each other without any rhyme or reason or no context given of why they were doing this. It was just portrayed as African savagery. It was quite racist the way the coverage was spun.
Yes.
And I didn't really pay too much attention to it either until a few years later. These trials began going, and then somebody asked me to get involved, and this general asked me to represent him. So I finally went there and met with him for 3 days. And over 3 days, he told me, he asked me if I was willing to listen, keep an open mind. I said, yeah. He said, okay, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened day by day by day. And he did. He told me exactly what happened from 1990 when the Ugandans and the British, with British and American Canadian help, invaded Rwanda, and the 4-year war that took place after that in the final months, what they call the genocide, took place, which is the final invasion army's offensive. And he told me day by day exactly what happened, who did what, who reacted how, and it all made sense. It all fell into place. Like, it's wow. You never got that in the press. And it was completely opposite to what they told you.
Do you know what I'd love to ask today, now that we've paid close attention to the actions taken in Niger and around, you know, Chad and the other places, what are the natural resources in Rwanda that were at stake? So they did this whole divide and conquer. I'm pretty sure there are substantial ones, aren't there?
Rwanda has maybe some gas in a lake near one of the Great Lakes near Rwanda. Is the Lake Kivu, has maybe some gas. But the main reason they targeted, there's some gold, but the main reason they targeted Rwanda was it's the doorway into Congo.
Yeah,
Rwanda is a very, very small country. And in the late 80s, 89 or so, the Americans got tired with Mobutu in Congo, who they put in power after they destroyed Lumumba. And because Mobutu was starting to turn towards the Chinese and make deals with the Chinese about resource allocations and mining and so forth.
That's a no-no.
Yeah, that's a no-no. So they threatened, they wanted to remove Mobutu, but they didn't know how to get into Congo to do it. So they asked the Rwandan government at the time, President Habyarimana, if Americans could use Rwanda as a base to launch an attack to overthrow Mobutu. And he said no. So then Rwanda became the target. And what they did was then spend 4 years, overthrow the government of Rwanda, and then use the Kagame dictatorship, which is still in ruling there, and with Ugandans, Museveni, to attack and invade Congo, which they did in 1996, 7, and 8. They've killed maybe 10 to 15 million people since then. And the whole idea was to divide the Congo into 3 separate parts, which is what they've essentially done.
Yeah.
And you made chaos there with continuous civil wars, really wars conducted by invading Ugandan and RPF or Rwandan forces. But they give them various names. They're proxy forces, but they say they're internal rebels, but they're not. They're really coming from outside. And they've just created chaos in the Congo. So Canadian, American, British, Israeli, South African mining companies have gone in there pretty freely and done whatever they wanted, and taking resources out of there without really paying the royalties they should be paying.
Oh yeah, and for context, the Congo, the traditional Congo, or the new borders of it, is rich beyond imagination when it comes to resources. It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, it's untapped. I mean, the timber resources in the forest, the power, the hydroelectric potential of the Congo River, if it was dammed in certain places, was enormous for electrifying all of Africa. Has gas, oil, rare earth minerals, gold, you name it, it's got it.
Yeah. The reason I said, oh, that's a big no-no, China controlling resources or not having bases was, I think, the main point Rwanda had, because we just learned from the Intercept, from these leaked Department of State Department communications, that basically Imran Khan was ousted at basically just an order from the US because he wanted peace with Russia. He wouldn't budge on Ukraine, and he wouldn't budge on foreign bases. But I didn't want to distract from Africa, because what we've been talking about here since, a week now was Niger. And we have, breathtaking new statements. I just want to read you one, which was from the European Special Envoy to the Sahel region. I'm just going to quote her name because I couldn't memorize it. Mrs. Emanuela Claudia Del Rey, who said this. This is amazing. There is not enough medicine, food, electricity is missing, even more than before. In order to weaken the junta, the sanctions must be continued. This is merely a week after they said that Russia is starving the world because of the grain deal. That they don't see the hypocrisy between the two statements. They simply don't, do they?
No. And I just got yesterday from Dr. Hans Kirkler in Vienna. He president of the International Progress Organization. He was famous because he was the Secretary General's rapporteur on the Lockerbie trial concerning Libya and the downing of that plane over Scotland. And he made a report to the Secretary General of the entire trial was rigged by the CIA and MI6. So that's his nature. But he just put out a statement stating that his organization, that these sanctions being applied by ECOWAS and the EU and the Americans are nothing more than collective punishment of the Nigerian people. That's what they're doing. All sanctions are, and that's what they're doing. And he says a breach of international law, which it is, of the UN Charter, which it is, of the ECOWAS treaties and agreements that they have among themselves. It's a violation of their own obligations under their own agreements. And it's rank hypocrisy because, they're doing exactly what they accuse Russia of doing in Ukraine, trying to squeeze people to get their own way.
There was another sort of far removed from reality statement. This was the spokesperson also of the Department of State, a gentleman called Matthew Miller, who said, it seems odd to me when a country is, what he says, suffering from attempted military takeover, his words, and the first thing you do is run to the store and buy a Russian flag. It just seems like an odd scenario to me. He just doesn't get it, does he? I don't think he does. Like NATO, Europe, they have suffered this boot for hundreds of years. They know it. They remember Libya. They remember Libya that most of Europe never actually experienced or watched on television. Sorry, Carlo. You want?
But he's trying to make a point, or a point is being made that he doesn't realize, and that is he's trying to imply that there's Russian influence here. And what I would ask is, what is Russia going to do about this situation? Russia, that they already have friendly relations with Mali. Wagner is loved in Mali. Burkina Faso, the president of Burkina Faso, is very high on Russia and China. You have access. You have access to those two countries to bring in all kinds of foodstuffs and supplies, and even start development programs that have been ignored. What is Russia going to do directly about it? That's what about the situation. That's what I would ask of Russia primarily. That does anybody have any insight into that? I can't find any.
I have a response, but I think I want to hear from Christopher first.
Oh, well, my understanding right now, as of today, the Russians have not supported the coup. They're playing it neutral.
I have the same information.
They prefer democratic solutions. The Chinese are playing the same way because they don't like internal coups and people can do it to them. On the other hand, they probably secretly welcome the shift. But there's rumors that there were Wagner forces in Niger. There are no, as far as I'm aware, there are no Wagner forces in Niger at all.
And certainly none before the coup.
None before the coup.
Zero evidence.
I'm not even sure there's maybe some in Mali. I don't, but there's none have entered Niger. I'm not sure they've been asked for. But yeah, but the popular support in the demonstrations is very interesting, of course, to watch that, to see the Russian flag being displayed, and there's obviously a big shift as the war in Ukraine takes place and the power of the EU fades, and the hegemony of the Americans is beginning to fade. These countries, which have been under the thumb of Western colonialists, have finally started to throw off the vestiges of that. And we see on the map, West Africa is mainly controlled by the French, some Spanish, Spanish Morocco and things like that. There's some vestiges of Spanish influence there, but mainly France, and not only direct military control since they left those colonies officially, but through the use of the CFA, the French franc,
the colonial franc,
colonial franc, which was they're forced to use, and they're forced to keep their gold reserves in France. The deals that they signed to arrange all this with puppet governments back in the past are strange, but that's the result. So France was controlling their entire economies, and they finally have felt strong enough to rebel against that. But whether France does something like they threatened to bomb Niger, I don't know. I mean, if the hypocrisy goes that far, I don't know.
But
I'll get back to your Russian question. What do you think, Carlo? Because
okay. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
So I wanted to say that, because Wagner was not there, Russia did not embrace this coup. They were slightly embarrassed about it in diplomatic circles, from what I could tell. But what happened basically was the responses they were amazing, because this Department of State spokesperson, they tried to pin it on Russia. Look, Russia did this. It's Russian disinformation leading the coup. No. And what they did was they sent Vicky Nuland in there, who was booted out, didn't get to meet the previous president, didn't get to meet the new president, was forced to deal with the...
Didn't bring cookies, Ben. If she would have brought cookies,
didn't bring cookies. She was booted out, and immediately U.S. aid basically ceased. Right now, the UN aid has ceased to Uganda, which is a different story, doesn't it? And they just responded saying, keep your aid. We've received aid for 40 years, and there has been no fucking development. Sorry for talking about that, but we're talking in that way. But that's the beautiful thing about it. General Chiani has just created a new revolutionary government. They didn't bend, they didn't budge. I think ECOWAS, which I have a question about that for later, was supposed to lead. They were very gung-ho in the beginning to lead an intervention, an armed intervention, and they didn't. The Senate rebelled in Nigeria, different places. The people in Senegal rebelled, and basically it's not happening. So France, do it yourself if you want to do the dirty work, and it hasn't happened. So it seems to me that this is a stalemate, and Russia doesn't need to do anything. Just wait.
But no, they can't. It's the bar for improving the situation for the people on the ground in Niger is so low that 10 to 15% have electricity. So this notion that Nigeria shutting off the electricity to Niger is almost a joke in that regard, but prices are soaring in Niger. I mean, for people who can't afford the basics already. So when this situation occurs, Russia and China, they have to be there. They just have to be there. I mean, if they want to garner the fruits of this, and especially China across the Sahel, which they've already initiated hundreds of Belt and Road initiatives. They've really got to be there for the people on the ground when they step up and essentially say yes to Russia and China. Yes, they have to be there to be their partners. They can't let them starve. They can't. Yeah. They've got to step up. That's my soapbox. That's the way.
Didn't Russia already guarantee that they were gonna, send some free food aid? I'm not sure if that was to Niger.
It's one of the recipients is Niger.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. They've sent tens of thousands of tons of wheat for free to different African countries recently.
Yeah.
But I think the Russians may be relying on the local African countries to support Niger at this point. Now you have Chad and Mali went to meet with the new leadership. Algeria has pledged support. I'm sure
Guinea.
that was encouraged by Russia, and other countries. So that's maybe why ECOWAS backed away, because they saw if Nigeria, because Nigeria would supply most of the forces if any force went in, because they got the biggest army.
Yeah.
If they saw that, oh my goodness, now we're not just fighting the small 10,000 men in Niger, we're going to fighting Algerian forces in Chad, Mali, and maybe Wagner would be involved then. Maybe we don't want to do that.
Yeah,
So
it would,
I hope
like a
that's-
Pan-African conflict, it would have turned into that. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
it
that,
would have
it's
been
a sidetrack to say they officially invited Wagner. It doesn't really, in the big equation, it's a side.
But as good as the intentions are for the other African countries, like Burkina Faso, they're the highlight of those intentions. I feel 40% of that country is controlled by Boko Haram and other Islamist groups that are a product of Libya and beyond. They're really a product of Afghanistan in the when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. This is an ongoing process. So they're too weak to do essentially that job. They can't. They're having difficulty feeding their own people, and they're under fire. They're under fire from these Islamist groups, which really have U.S. CIA and British intelligence behind them and all that. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
And
We're honest.
and so this is the time. This is the time. Russia. This is the linchpin. I feel Russia's got to step in, and the Chinese have got to play a role. And they've got it. And they've got to feed people. They just at the basic level, they've got to feed people. So
Well,
I haven't heard.
They could do what the African countries cannot do. What Mali.
I wasn't aware there was an economic fallout within Niger that was leading to impending starvation. I mean, obviously, the people have been perpetually impoverished, but I didn't realize that. I mean, it's news to me that prices have skyrocketed in the country and people are facing a dismal future that needs.
Well, they already were. They were already
Yeah.
in the dismal future.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that scene in Full Metal Jacket. You know, if you do this, you'll be in a world of shit. And the private says, I'm already in a world of shit. You know, that's where they are. That's why this revolt took place.
But was the crisis made worse by the coup? I haven't heard.
Well, no, it's not by the coup. It was made worse by the fact that the sanctions were placed on the coup leaders. The Islamist fundamentalists are now seen. You know, it's now seen as though a potential that they can go in and take big chunks of Africa because the governments there are too weak, and I'm talking about the Mali government and the Burkina Faso government and the Niger government. They're too weak to defend themselves against these Islamist groups. So it could be a big win for Washington down the road. Big win.
Well, at the point, one of the problems that these three countries, Mali, Chad, four now, Burkina Faso and Niger, had is that the Americans came in and the French to combat these Islamist groups, and yet the Islamist guerrilla operations keep taking place, and they began to suspect that the French were actually running these people, and the Americans were running these people, and then using as an excuse to stay there and occupy and mine and take things out like they're doing in Syria. As you know, Russia stated, I think the foreign ministry stated last few days ago, that practically all the terrorist groups in the world are controlled by the CIA. All of them.
Yeah.
And Boko Haram was created, that's quite clear, by MI6 CIA, basically initially to stir up trouble in Nigeria. And Nigeria is also under pressure because they've murdered people and kidnapped women and children and girls, created chaos, blown up bombs in bus stations and train stations. So Nigeria has also faced that an attempt to create chaos and break up Nigeria, because Nigeria is quite a powerful country and the West doesn't like that. It used to be a British colony. So I think myself that one of the reasons they've acted is not because they want to get rid of the Islamic terrorists, but to do that, they got to get rid of the Americans and the French who control them and supply them. I don't think the Islamist terrorists would function anymore without the help of the Americans and whoever else is behind it in Europe. So that's my view of it.
Whatever divisive figure, Prigozhin is, Mr. Chefman, Wagner is good at slaughtering these guys, the Islamists, and beating them, actually eradicating them. So I see a solution there. As for the food issue, Russia has already proven that it's game. It's on board with alleviating the pain. So
and the prices seem to have gone up. I think you're right, because of the closing of borders to trade, and foodstuffs going in and out have been stopped for temporarily anyway. We hope not for long. But that's caused oil prices, grain prices to go up for everybody. So, and the population, of course, has gone from 3 million around 1960 to tens of millions now.
Yeah.
And then it's a desert country. So,
since we touched upon Nigeria, there was an interesting article in the Gray Zone about the president of Nigeria. Now we had Abdullah Hamzat on, and he was very, very supportive of Bola Tinubu. And he won, of course, Tinubu was the favorite. And he won the election. But it's come out in an article in the Gray Zone based on information from WikiLeaks. This is how important Julian Assange is to the world. That Tinubu, when he was studying the Chicago School of Economics, the Milton Friedman how to steal from everybody School of Economics, that he was also involved in money laundering and was under suspicion from the American DOJ and the FBI. And if that's not a sort of Damocles to hold over the president of Nigeria's head, I don't know of a bigger one. So when you hear him come out and talk about, well, we're going to go in with and invade the Niger, he's getting his marching orders. Definitely is right, just a few blocks from my house. He's getting his marching orders.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, from watching a video from Dr. Gerald Horn, you might know him, Chris, by the way, he said that in African circles, he's being referred to as Ebola Tinubu. So he's very, very toxic among the population. Yeah.
Well, many African leaders or the compradors put in place, by the way. Museveni is one of the worst, yet he was greeted and treated very well in Russia, but because Russia deals with states, they don't care who's the ruler. They deal with the practical people, same as the Chinese. They may not like them, but they shake their hand. And Museveni is one of the main British-American assets in Central Africa, the Great Lakes region. There are others, Tanzanians. I was at a meeting a few years back in Tanzania, and at the hotel I was at, I suddenly saw a whole, like 20 or 30 American officers arrive with some Tanzanian army officers. They're like colonels and captains and majors, lots of gold braid. And they had this big meeting in this room, and I thought, what the heck? Why are all these American officers in Tanzania? So I asked some people, and they said, well, we can't tell you. But they're all over the place. Since they established Africa Command,
AFRICOM,
yeah.
Then you got the signal, why is America's not involved in Africa? Why are they establishing military command for that continent? Well, then they weren't there yet, except in Somalia, that region. Well, then you began seeing bases being built here and here and here, just to counter the Chinese, and to control the resources of Africa, which they need. So they're going to reestablish another form of colonialism with American colonialism instead of French, British, and German and Portuguese, which were kicked out. I remember there are quite a few aid groups in Tanzania. When you meet them, they're Americans, and you talk to them, they're very closed. They won't tell you anything, but they pick children and they send to college in the States, and then they train them and send them back, and they become agents for them, and they start doing things against the interests of the people.
We have that NGO layer here in Hungary too. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
So it's a good time to take our half-hour break, I think, Chris, and then it's like 30 seconds, and we'll be right back. So if the producer wants to run us to break real quick, if not, we can continue.
Do you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. With World Inkers Printing and Publishing, you do not require a lot of money to publish with us. Contact us today at info.worldinkers@gmail.com. Become a winner with other authors at World Inkers Printing and Publishing. Give us a shot. We will surely finish you.
Okay, well, that was our commercial. There's some sound problems on my end. I'm not sure if everybody else heard that, but we're back. Chris, I want to touch on where you were going right before break, but I also wanted to kind of summarize, the basic thrust of what you were saying in the beginning about Rwanda, and how after the end of the Cold War, the United States, the West, really had a plan for global domination.
Right.
So that plan included the Balkanization of Yugoslavia and the takeover of Eastern Europe, and it also included the takeover of Africa. And there was this whole propaganda offensive put in place about this big, huge genocide in Rwanda. And that was the impetus and the justification for doing, what we've, for AFRICOM, really, and even perpetuating the whole right to protect policy about how we're a force for good, saving lives, etc. But I wanted to point out, because I learned this from you, that this whole genocide narrative of 800,000 Tutsis, that really is not something that can continue to be maintained if there's a census. So they still haven't had an actual census in Rwanda because that census was proved the hoax of this narrative. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, no, you got it. You learned your lesson well. You're very good. That's actually what happened. And if I can draw back a bit for a bigger perspective, one can see, so when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, then you see an immediate reaction by the American government into breaking up Yugoslavia, starting in 1990, 91, 92, 93, 94, and continuing to 99. At the same time, they go into Somalia, and then they help overthrow the Rwandan government in a 4-year war there between 1990 and 1994. So they move on two continents at the same time, Europe and Africa. And they're linked, I think, in my mind. That's why they have two tribunals linked, because they concern the same parties involved, the Americans and NATO. You can also see the war in Rwanda as a war by the United States against France and French control of Central Africa. Because the French have a lot of influence in Congo, Brazzaville, and other countries. And they had a lot of influence in Rwanda. But they were not involved in what the so-called genocide. Their forces were not there. And they only came in July 94 in the UN operation. But they were not involved. That's what the Kagame government claims. But the Americans succeeded in pushing the French out of Central Africa. And now the French are being pushed out of West Africa, the final control. One can almost see the hand of the United States in that, perhaps. I don't know. It's a bit murky. Maybe
I've heard this.
Yeah, maybe too deep there. But so you have this continuous war by the Americans through proxy conflicts to push the French out of Africa. and seem to be succeeding. I mean, remember the Americans screwed the French with the submarine deal.
AUKUS, yes.
AUKUS. So the French have never. So there's,
And
the
let's
French,
not forget Nord Stream with the Germans.
and the Germans with Nord Stream. Yeah. So the
Guys,
Americans
I
seem to be.
don't like this idea that Victoria, fuck the EU Newland, would be mean to her European allies. I don't buy that for a second.
No.
Our friends and allies.
But going back to the Rwanda picture, the important thing from there is that, yes, they've used that war, and the mantra that we in the West didn't do anything to stop the savagery in Rwanda. We should have done something. And as a result of that, they've then justified this fake doctrine they've invented called responsibility to protect, or humanitarian intervention, which doesn't exist in law. We don't have to obey the international law. If we feel we should go in to help people, we can do anything we want, and somehow that's justified. So that's what they've done. But that war, the Americans, most Americans realized that the American forces were involved in that war, especially the last few months, because American soldiers were seen at Kagame's headquarters in Rwanda 2 days before the presidential plane was shot down, and he was killed along with the Army Chief of Staff and everybody else. And then the invading forces, the RPF and Ugandan forces who were fighting inside Rwanda, launched their final offensive. It was a surprise attack. The government didn't know it was happening. And we've been told by their officers that they killed 2 million people in 12 weeks. And most of them were Hutus. Yeah, there were a lot of Tutsis killed too. It's a war. But we think most of the dead were Hutus, not Tutsis, because the actual population of Tutsis in Rwanda in 1994 was only 545,000. And yet Kagame claims that 800,000 survived. So who are the 800,000 dead? They can't be Tutsis. They have to be Hutus, who are the majority population. But the Tutsis have a very aristocratic view. They view the Hutus as nothing but peasants, and they only deserve to be their serfs and slaves, and they're the superior race. It's quite a racist attitude towards the Hutus by the Tutsis. So that war was very important, because then it led to the war in all these wars in the Congo since then. That's destabilized Central Africa. And then the Americans and the NATO finally attacked Libya, because Gaddafi had established a successful socialist state there, was going to then create a new African currency based on gold. And that, when he announced that, that's when they attacked him and murdered him and destroyed Libya, and is still destroyed, still in the state of chaos. And then they conducted the so-called Arab Spring across North Africa to try and get rid of the government in Egypt, Tunisia, even Algeria, and some other place. I forget. Maybe, I'm not sure about Morocco, but they tried it in Algeria too. Remember, Algeria faced a very severe war against Islamists back in the 90s, for about 10 years. So many people were killed. It was severe. I think 200,000 people were killed in the fighting in Algeria by the army against Islamic groups, supported by we don't know who, but you can figure out who. They were getting weapons from somebody. That was successfully crushed, but it was a very bitter conflict. So you can see this. Now we have this situation in West Africa. We see the Chinese now have established a base in Somalia, in Djibouti. In Djibouti, right next to the French Foreign Legion base and the American base across the streets. That's a very strange situation with them. The final French Foreign Legion base is in Djibouti. The Chinese have a base there to protect their shipping routes, and then the Americans have a base there, right in the same town.
Sort of across the street, looking
right
at each other.
Basically, yeah. It's a strange situation.
Actually, my understanding is that the United States is still renting the port. It's actually owned by the Chinese.
They may be. That may be true.
Materiel, yeah.
Yeah. So they're trying to control all the resources of Africa, keep the Europeans out, control it for themselves, along with the British, perhaps. But the racism is stark, because now the British, who admitted Rwanda to the British Commonwealth, even though it was never a British colony, and people speak French or their own Kinyarwanda, They now are going to use Rwanda as a dumping ground for refugees, as a punishment to dissuade refugees from coming to Britain. They're going to say, if you come to Britain, we're going to send you to the middle of Africa.
Oh, geez.
So Africa to the British is considered as a garbage dump for refugees they don't want. This is how the
weird
jungle,
thinking.
Yeah, it's weird thinking. Can you imagine sending Ukrainian refugees down to Rwanda, or Iraqis or Arabs trying to survive with a murderous regime like Kagame runs in Rwanda, where you can disappear overnight. My investigator has disappeared in 2016, and he's never appeared since. We believe he was murdered. He was kidnapped in Nairobi in open daylight, and the Kenyan police cooperated in that kidnapping, and he was sent to Rwanda, and he's been killed. So these are the people you're dealing with. You can't trust anybody really there.
Yeah, that's the paradise for the U.S. designs, isn't it? This chaos, murderous regime. By the way, we just had. Sorry, I'm just going to cheat a little bit. A presidential hopeful assassinated in Ecuador.
Yes.
Yeah, I have it right here.
Carlo,
sorry. Good.
Carlo,
I just wanted that I have a kind of press release by a former Canadian ambassador to Venezuela, Paul Craig Murray, and it's entitled "When a CIA Asset Becomes a CIA Liability."
Mm-hmm.
And his thesis is that the gentleman, what's his name, Fernando Villavicencio,
Villavicencio, I think. Yeah,
was a CIA asset, and then he fell afoul of the agency.
Yeah,
and the agency is possibly behind his murder.
Yeah, pay attention, Zelensky. It doesn't help that some narco gang called Los Lobos took responsibility for it, because obviously this is sanctioned. You know?
Yeah, the Ecuadorian Communist Party put out a statement today saying that this may be a ruse to cancel. They've declared a state of emergency today, and they say it's not going to interfere with the elections. But the Communist Party of Ecuador says that maybe otherwise. They may be trying to stop the elections and keep this present government in power.
Of course.
And also, this guy wasn't a progressive candidate. He was another right-wing candidate. So they may have eliminated one of the opposition members who threatened the rule of the right wing because they were going to split the vote. I don't know. But Zelensky should be worried, but all of them should be worried.
You took that right out of my mouth. I was saying, Zelensky, are you paying attention to when an asset is no longer useful?
Yeah.
I also want to add that the basic information, he also cites WikiLeaks as being a source. So once again, the centrality of WikiLeaks
I just
be
wanted to
minimized.
say, I saw a graph. I didn't prepare to put it in a slide or anything, but it was violence, gun and shooting violence in Ecuador. And since 2017, Rafael Correa was ousted. It went way down. It was like an anti-crime regime, really successful.
Correa,
Correa. And it just skyrocketed ever since. But since you're here, this is the question I've been burning to ask you. And a friend of mine who's actually shocked but well-informed nowadays, he asked me, look, the European Union, it was supposed to be an economic cooperative between us Europeans. ECOWAS was supposed to be an economic cooperation between Africans. When did they become, he was shocked because he knew the truth, when did they become tools for Africa? Now, you've answered this in so many words, but I'm wondering if you want to have a final response to a question like that.
Why they've become agents of the West in a way, or...
Well, he asked me when, but I had my answer.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think myself, when the EU project, the economic community first was set up, I think that was an American backed project. They hoped then to solidify control of Europe by solidifying the government of a unified government of Europe. They would then control that. It'd be easier to controlling individual countries. And the EU... quite clearly now, when 4 or 5, 6 years ago, when the French and the Germans began talking about establishing an independent foreign policy, and an independent European army.
Yeah,
Then
they
the
talked and
Americans,
talked.
yeah, they talked and talked, but it probably got to the American government, and we don't want to allow this to happen, because then then the Europe becomes a rival, maybe another rival, imperialist rival with us, with China. So now they've acted. Well, Britain, first of all, Britain left with Brexit, so that weakened the EU, also weakened Britain tremendously. Although I supported Brexit at the time, because I think the EU was very undemocratic. But nevertheless, it has weakened Britain and forced it into the arms of the United States, which treats it with complete disdain and contempt.
Oh yeah.
And they now, obviously, with Nord Stream and these attacks, have weakened Europe. With the Ukraine war, have destroying Europe as we speak economically. And ECOWAS, I do not know how much influence the Americans had on ECOWAS or the British or French, but I think that was an honest attempt by African countries to establish their own control over their own resources and economy. But these people often are trained in the West, in American, British, and French schools and universities, and they come back and they got lots of contacts in the West. It's quite easy to manipulate them. And I think that's what's been going on with them. And that's why they reacted. So, because I would think that most African countries would welcome a regime or a new regime which kicks out the European colonizers, not support the European colonizers or the Americans. I don't.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. How they actually physically or organizationally control these groups, these organizations. It's,
well, my short and simplistic answer was from day one, by design. Obviously, now that the pressure is mounting, they need to consolidate control over both blocks, and Europe has become, except Hungary, thank goodness, has become basically a frenzied war party, the whole bloody thing.
Yeah,
and
except in Germany, where the ADF is rising fast. I met, did I tell you, I met in Cuba several Germans, all from Eastern Germany, Leipzig, Dresden, and places like that. And they're all middle-aged people, all like me.
From the DDR, then?
Yeah, former told me they were members, all former high officials. All of them had posts quite high in the GDR Communist Party and apparatus. And they said, they all support the ADF. I said, well, the story here is that the ADF's a Nazi party. He said, oh, they laughed. They said, that's what they tell you to try and stop people from voting for them, but they're not.
Every headline,
yeah. So there were some right-wing people that proto-Nazis joined at the beginning because we're against NATO, blah, 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 and nationalists. And that attracted some of the neo-Nazis, but they've basically been booted out. So most of the support comes from ex or former or present communists who don't like NATO, support Russia, don't like the war, don't like the immigration policies which bring in cheap labor, undercutting German labor. So there's quite a strong support for that party in Germany. I think the opinion supporting the war in Germany is shifting very fast. In France, I don't know. I mean, France is a mess with its own issues. And I'm not sure how long Macron will last, and this may weaken Macron, this whole contretemps in Niger, and France losing its uranium supplies potentially, and severe problems.
I just wanted to add uranium supplies, gold supplies, and companies that were untaxed for the whole of the colonial era are now becoming taxed because those non-tax agreements are unsigned. This is good news for the world. Yeah. But on Germany, this is the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland. Every headline tells me they're a Nazi party. Far right is the word everywhere in the world, in the Western press. Yeah. And so they might have good intention. And I've seen really good protests with Russian flags, with Z saying, we don't want any of this NATO out, fuck off. We want to get back to friendship. But on the other hand, the recent news is that Rheinmetall, the corporation that ran out of everything, is now bought, I don't know, the Leopard tanks from Belgium to send to Ukraine. And now Germany has transferred 2 more Patriot missile launchers, not entire unit, just the launcher unit to Ukraine. So whatever happens, the current leadership, which is, Scholz obviously is not really the leader, but, Habeck and Baerbock and these people, they don't seem to be easing up at all.
No, but I don't think they'll last long if the elections were to take place soon. Yeah, I mean, they're sending these Leopard tank, but they're buying them from an arms dealer. So I understand it from a private arms dealer who has them in storage. And they're Leopard 1s, old Leopard 1s.
Yes, the old ones. Yeah.
So they have to be refurbished. And the Americans are going to send in 30 Abrams tanks, but they'll be destroyed. I mean, and 2 Patriots. The Russians, I think, have destroyed every Patriot battery being sent in so far.
Yeah.
I think 5 or 6 have been sent in. They've all been destroyed. And they've got a crew of like 90 to 100 people. So when they're destroyed, and I'm sure they're manned by Americans because nobody else knows how to operate them, there's casualties are quite heavy. So I don't think this is going to do anything. Now we have the Russian army now entering the city of Kupiansk today. So that's the next major battle. So they've now broken through the defenses completely. They're walking.
They have. Do you know what that territory is? That's when what they were very proud of, that the Kherson offensive took it, which is when the Russians orderly retreated and just said, just come in, we're gone. That was their big offensive. Look how good we are, because the Russians apparently ran away. Yeah,
now they've backed out of the eastern part of Kupiansk. Apparently because they have no built-in lines of defenses now. The Russians have broken through all those. Now it's open country, basically. So I think that we're going to see things moving. So we have this attack in the Black Sea to harass Russia, attacking ships. But the Russians may react to that. I don't know what's going to go on, but it's very dangerous what's going on, because the Americans we don't know what they're going to do to save Zelensky or save Ukraine, so-called. I have no idea.
I don't know. There's signs of them abandoning this guy. We'll see.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
and this whole thing with Niger and what's happening in West Africa, and China, we have the Americans giving weapons to Taiwan and stirring up trouble still against China, and then Imran Khan. This comes out about Imran Khan being overthrown by the Americans' orders, basically, and then we have this trouble in West. I don't know if they can.
And don't forget it. But don't forget Iran. There's just a lot of moving pieces. Yeah. All bad news for Zelensky, because not a lot of the spotlight is on him when all of this is going on.
Exactly. There's a lot of distractions. And then the Trump indictment, we can go on about that. That's, I think, a huge mistake for Biden. I think I don't know what you guys think of either one of them, but I think that was a huge mistake by Biden to charge him with the latest charges, because that's all it's going to do is, in his trial, he's going to argue that the election was rigged, and he believed it to be rigged, and he's going to keep saying, because you see, I was told this, and I was told this, and I was told that.
Look, just a quick point. Let's remove the name Trump and Biden from this thing. Do they notice that every presidential candidate who has been a sitting president, this can happen to from now on?
Yes.
Like, this can happen to any president. I hope.
Yeah, but it didn't happen to Al Gore claimed the election in 2000 was rigged, and he finally just gave up that. But he wasn't charged with trying to subvert the Constitution for saying so. But now
he willingly stood down. He did what the ruling establishment told him to do.
Yeah, he
is not following the script that he is supposed to be reading from, and he never has, and that's why they don't have any use for him.
Right, exactly.
But man, you just summarized a lot of stuff that's going on. I mean, those are all the things.
It's almost too much to take. It's almost too much to take in to analyze what's going on. It's swirling around. It makes me feel I guess it makes everybody feel very nervous about what the potential for further conflict is. Yeah. I mean, because all these problems inside the United States and Europe, what way out is more war? I hope that's not the case, but.
I'm in Hungary, which means I'm next to Poland. So that is my major worry in the world. But there's a lot of moving pieces. We are all pretty worried. But since you mentioned the US elections, I just want to put in this little quote, which was from a million-year-old Nancy Pelosi. Imagine this. If Trump were to be president, it would be a criminal enterprise in the White House. Can you imagine such a thing? I can't.
Yeah. No problem.
Just saying it,
It's like they want to establish a one-party state.
It is.
And they're using Trump as the excuse. We can't have. I don't like Trump myself either. Right? I don't like any of these people. But from just from looking at democracy, you can't. If you're going to try and shut down the leading candidate of the opposition party, and whoever else was there in that party, you would try and do the same to them. You're trying to establish a one-party state.
Yeah, it's eerie.
I don't know why people can't see that. It's just
Yeah. I mean, it's
bizarre.
kind of like it
They're
already
locked
is
in
a
the-
one-party state, but there's, the Republicans are on board. Most of the Republicans hate Trump too.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, it shows you who's really in control in the back room is those.
but they
same
can't say
corporations.
that because he's got the grassroots support. He's got the
Yeah.
voters that actually support him. And so all the establishment Republicans have to pretend to give him lip service and pretend they don't hate him. But they'd be more than happy with Biden getting another term before Trump.
I'm just going to say to the so-called democratic socialists and the so-called lefties and the so-called progressives in America that Bernie fucking Sanders endorsed Biden already. Come on, just think.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, to end on something positive, I am looking forward to Russia going back to the moon. It's been, I don't know, it's 1976, so almost 50 years. And the Luna 25, which, well, a space, they call everything a space station, including rovers, probes. I think this is an unmanned probe that's launching tonight. So I think 3 or 4 hours from now, and I am going to watch that to end on something nice,
And the Indians just launched one a few days too, a probe to the moon. They're approaching as we speak, I think, to land their probe. So
they already had a nice Indian named probe that discovered water, didn't they? Or I
yeah,
have to read up on this.
I'm not sure the Chinese or India. I think it was the Indians that discovered water. Yeah, even a slight atmosphere at certain times. But I guess a lot of people will still deny that the Americans went to the moon, or that these trips are actually taking place. You see that?
I said a couple of programs ago, I want China and Russia to land exactly where that flag is. We would have final proof one way or the other. No questions anymore.
Well, the Japanese, the Indians, and the Chinese orbiters have all taken photos of those landing sites. They published them.
Okay.
So
good. No more doubts anymore. So what about some concluding thoughts? We had, I think, about 2 minutes. Anybody want to go first? Rapidly changing times, I know.
Well, I'll go first, and it's just back to Niger and Africa, and this being a natural born conspiracy theorist, because most of the conspiracies I believe that have historically panned out. This weakening of France after Macron made several statements
and a trip to China
relevant to Ukraine
mm-hmm.
Has accelerated, and I would not put it by MI6 and the CIA to be behind some of the movement we've seen in the Sahel region in Africa now that runs counter to French interests.
That's a good point. I think you might, and that may be why the Russians are hesitating to support this coup, because they're not sure exactly what motivated it at that point.
Yeah.
What's it really all about? You may be right there.
So
maybe we'll know one day. Maybe we never will.
Time will tell. If we free Assange, we'll know.
Yeah. We should get WikiLeaks back online to have steady access to what they don't want us to know.
Well, I'm curious about Assange case, why he hasn't been extradited since the
right.
So it's the law under the treaty that if he's not extradited within 10 days after the final court decision approves it, which has happened, then he has the right to have it stopped, to block it. But I don't see his lawyers doing anything. But he has not been extradited within 10 days, so they cannot extradite him legally. But I don't see his lawyers holding. I never understood his legal team whatsoever.
No, me either.
Because they're all Soros-connected people. They're strange.
Uh-oh.
And they don't hold press conferences and say, we're doing this and this is terrible. Because that's what I would be doing. I'd be on a whole press conference saying, you can't do this and this and this and that. But no, I don't know why he's got these people. But anyway.
No.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
I can't stop being. Me neither, and I can't stop being ashamed that George Soros is my countryman. Was.
Well, we have, look at my government, we have all these people.
I'm Team Barbie. I'm not sure you've seen that. Justin Trudeau's official Twitter, I think he was out with his son, both wearing pink T-shirts, and I'm with Team Barbie.
Oh, yeah, I did see something like that. Yeah,
I didn't want to end on that note, but thank you for coming back with us.
You're welcome.
a lot of stuff I wasn't aware of, including the Julian Assange extradition policies. So to the viewers out there, thank you. If you've been with us, please like and share to support us, and see you next week.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
right.
Check
Did
out.
you know that there is a publishing company that wants to make life easier for you as a writer? This publishing company is called World Inkers Printing and Publishing. We publish in all different languages, and we're looking for writers of all genres, all formats. We're looking for scholars, ghostwriters, playwrights, poets, short fiction, novelists, you name it. We're looking for anybody who is interested in writing and the craft of writing to be in touch with us. You can reach us at info.worldinkers@gmail.com.